Okay, well, hello and welcome to our session about AI. As I'm sure you know, uh, the buzz these days in education everywhere is all about AI. I am passionate about this and I've done a lot of work with it in teaching and in learning. I'm actually presenting at another conference, the ISTE conference, about this too. So just to kick it off and to kind of get us in the feeling of what's going on here and now and in the future, I just have a quick video that hopefully we won't have any issues with. So I'm just going to keep it here so it seemed to have not worked when I clicked it. So take a look at this here. And when you look at this, think of, where do we as humans get our inspiration? How do we dream? How do we innovate? And then I'll show you the next one. This is what happens when we have that inspiration. So basically today, what we're going to talk about is the difference between having that inspiration and then using that inspiration to create different things that make our world work better and in a more efficient way. Think about your passions. What are you passionate about? That's what makes us human. When you teach, when you're doing a lesson plan, when you're learning, it's going to be created from whatever your passion is. And when we think of AI, we as humans take our passions and we translate that into something that's going to enrich our lives in a positive way. So what's the goal of AI? Well, the research says that it allows machines, right, and computers to act in a good manner, in a way that's going to be helpful for us. But today, we're going to be talking about AI and how it's used in work and in education. And we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly.
As we look at AI, there's so much that we can say, and we will try to say as much of it as we can in this 45-minute period we have with you. I encourage you to interact with us via the chat as we go forward. You know, on one extreme, there are all kinds of predictions, and we saw that wonderful video of that robot that is apparently communicating and responding in a sentient way. There is, on one extreme point of view, a book that just came out, The Myth of Artificial Intelligence by Eric Lawson, where he says, you know, folks, it's all overblown. We're not anywhere near having what we would call general artificial intelligence. And we should not be focusing on that because it skews the arguments about what AI can actually do now and what we can predict for the future. At the same time, as we're looking at a book like that, and we see an article, as was floating around yesterday on the net, I think through the New York Times, talking about a Google engineer that was saying, I think that what we have is sentient. And people go, no, it's not. And he's saying, well, maybe it is. And we're looking at these extreme views. Let me suggest, for the context of our conversation today, that what we really want to think about here is what's possible. How can we use that? How do we interact with artificial intelligence as it exists today and where it might go? And let's start off with that question that Lisa's kind of kicked off here about, do we want machines to be human and think like humans, and talk about the advantages and disadvantages? As we think about that, a great context is to think about what was possible 10 or 15 years ago, what we're seeing now. 10, 15 years ago, few of us would have imagined Siri, Alexa, and Google would be sitting in our houses, listening to us, answering us, and in the worst of situations, broadcasting things that we were saying when we didn't expect them to be broadcast out there. That sort of scares a lot of us about how much control we have over it. And Lisa pointed out very well as we were planning for this session, in some ways we've had people advising us on things. When we ask ourselves, do we want Siri and Alexa and Google, Netflix, or suggesting us what we should be looking at and what we should be watching, guiding our actions, we think about the other things in our life, people like librarians out of that last session we just had on future of libraries. And the question is, they've guided us in things. Now they are helping with some of the AI out there and helping to put together databases like Novelist, which online can suggest to you books based on books you've already read. So where do we go with this? How comfortable are we? And what do we want our machines to do? Anybody, if you want to put it in chat, go ahead. If you want to unmute yourself briefly with a comment, let's go that way. I already see George coming in with Ruben Fuentedora's model, SAMR, could be a helpful litmus test. Can AI in its current state redefine how we teach? Great question. Anybody else? What are we comfortable with in terms of AI? Nobody's comfortable. Nobody wants to say.
Well,
Thanks, George.
I guess I'll chime in. You know, at least in the current state that it's available to me as a teacher, is that AI is really more of a black box than something that I have insight into how it's built or how my students are they reaching outcomes because of the help of AI. So I don't know, that makes a little bit of a messy statement, but that's kind of my current state with it.
In a very superficial and broad way, George, are you seeing it as a helpful thing or not so helpful yet?
I can see that benefits, but in its current state, it's not helpful.
Fair enough. Anybody else? What are you seeing with AI, and are you incorporating it into your work at any level? Emily's in the chat with, I have privacy concerns about using digital assistants with students in data collection. And it's a broad thing that we've been exploring through ShapingEDU. Let me put it out there to all of you. This is not a 45-minute conversation that comes and goes. This is part of an overall set of explorations we do at ShapingEDU, and we hope you will stay with us as community members at any level that works for you. Check us out overall through the conference and find us online. If you're watching the archive version, go back to the ShapingEDU website and come into the group, join these conversations. But back to the main question, other people, AI and you, what are you seeing?
Think of AI that you interact with every day. AI in your city, AI that predicts traffic, the way that the traffic flows in your city. AI when you go to the airport and you're getting ready to park and you're in the parking garage and you can see a green light where there's a space to park. AI in medicine, no longer does a radiologist read x-rays. They turn it over to the AI, which does a better job actually than the human eye. It's really all around us. And so forming an opinion, it's a little bit too late because it's kind of there. But as it continues to be around us, and especially as it continues to infiltrate in the education sector, that's where we really want to start to have this conversation.
And Brent adds into the chat, AI is on our smartphones. Susan adds in about, been reading a lot of articles lately about the very thing I mentioned, LAMDA, who has declared itself sentient. We've got all kinds of things floating around out there. And our sense of skepticism has to come with a sense of wonder about what's possible here, but not losing what the general theme of this session is, looking at the ethical issues that all this raises for us and how we're going to incorporate that into our work. Lisa, you've done a lot of work recently on looking at tools in AI. You want to discuss some of those and describe those to people so those who may not be familiar can get an idea of what's out there in learning land for us?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, believe it or not, and many of you probably know this, I mean, before a student even enters an academic institution, and I'm talking about students applying, say, to get into a university, there are apps that universities are using right now that will tell them the likelihood of that student to enroll based on predictive AI that tells them, okay, these are these activities that they did when they were in high school and grades and all that. Yes, that's always been part of the admission process. But now institutions are using the AI not only to say, oh, this student will be a good fit for us and then offer the enrollment, but, oh, are they going to actually accept this enrollment, looking at like financial aid packages and all that. And it's made it a little bit different. I mean, I don't think I'd like to be a student applying right now with those stereotypes that basically some human had to teach the AI, right, to be able to make that prediction. But as we know, AI is all about data. And it's a collection of data, and then that's how it's able to make predictions. And so if if it does make those predictions, it's basing it on like a wide range of results. And then think about it once the student gets to campus. And I'm talking before they even enter the classroom or interact with their professors. There are smart campuses. They are, again, predicting traffic flow at the campus. ASU was one of the first to use AI in the football stadium. They can predict where the largest fan base is. And at one point in time, they would send them a push to get reactions and things like that from that fan base, and also use AI to understand in that section when they're going to be leaving and the best traffic flow out of the stadium. So that's before the students even get into the classroom. I know I teach at Florida Atlantic University, and everything is done with AI to assign me what classroom are you going to be teaching in? What's the traffic there? The AI that allows the door automatically opens, like 10 minutes before I go to the class. Yes, you can say, well, that's just, a computer app, but it's also predicting when's the best time the doors should open. When do the students arrive? How much time do they need in the class? So that's before they even get into the classroom. And then I have many tools, and I'll share my screen again. Hopefully everything will go well this time. Let's see, sorry. Recording. Let me make this larger, share screen. Okay. All right, so these over here are some different tools that are being used right now in universities. These are the most popular ones. We've got over here on the bottom left, I like this one. It answers the question, how much VR and AI are we using? So Microsoft has a lot of, if you go into the Microsoft for Education, they have a lot of apps now where students can, put on the VR headset and they can delve into AI. I've actually used this one, and this one is all about AI in smart cities, where they can put on the VR headset and it walks them through a smart city that uses AI for energy. And videos pop up and it explains everything about the AI for energy. This DeepL is probably one of the best translation AI. It does a better job than Google. Back in the day, I was a language teacher, and the first thing I would tell students, don't use Google Translate. It translates pool as lake. There's a big difference if you want to say I went to swim in my friend's pool and it changes it to the word lake. So that's something. This ADA is pretty cool, and I put links to all these, and I'm going to be sharing links to all of them. ADA is actually an AI personal assistant for students. So it helps the students get organized. It keeps them on track. It kind of prompts them when they haven't been submitting assignments for a certain amount of time. So that one's really interesting. This Newton Alta, and Paul, you had said you had heard it might have gone out of business. Evidently they resurrected. Now, because of AI, this where instructors can load assignments into this, and then it has predictive AI as to, say you're a chemistry teacher and there's one assignment that a lot of the students had a really hard time with. It will show you what questions they had a difficulty with, and it will create some more questions in that one area, and it will tell you how much they're engaging with your course, who's paying attention, who's not paying attention. Kind of creepy. I wouldn't have time in this 45 minutes to share it, but I just watched a video about in China, they have elementary school children wearing, it looks like a headset, a headband headset, and it actually gives the teacher real-time AI about how much they're paying attention. Are they falling asleep? Are they not engaging with the lesson? they actually also send the results home to the parents. So we have to say, well, that could be helpful if you know that, okay, when I'm talking in this kind of a voice, the kids aren't listening, but when I'm walking around the room, they are. And then the last one is this a writing assessment platform. And, you know, when we talk about writing and we get into the ethics of AI, and I think Paul's going to address this in a minute, like, what do you think? Like, should AI grade an essay? And take it one step further, there's some AIs that actually write the essay for the student. And that to me is just like crazy. And how do you know that it was an AI that wrote that essay or not? So those are just some of the apps that I find are the most useful today in education. And now I'll pass it over to Paul for workforce.
Actually, Lisa, I'm going to stop long enough to pose a question to you that was put in a chat here from Susan, and the chat's moving so fast I've lost it. Here we go. How much of what we're talking about is AI versus enhanced reality? Do you have a good overview of that at this point?
You know what? They kind of merge the enhanced reality and the AI. Remember, AI, the one word that we got to use all the time with AI, and even when I teach my AI course, is data, right? So anytime you want, if you get into machine learning, which is what AI is, you're teaching that machine through inputting data. So AI is very heavily dependent on data put in, and then it gives you out, whereas enhanced learning would be more from just, if you're talking about, are you talking about VR enhanced learning? I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
Kristen asked the question. You want to unmute and pursue that with Lisa for a minute?
Sure.
Thanks.
It came in my head more when you were talking about the teachers who wore a headset and could see results of what students were doing, kind of thing. That felt very enhanced reality to me, as opposed to artificial intelligence, which AI almost feels more like it's something making an independent judgment versus enhanced reality, giving you additional information about what's in front of you.
So where they would merge would, yes, absolutely, that would be the enhanced reality. But then the data would allow maybe reset the type of lesson plan, especially if it was, say, in virtual learning, right?
So we're adaptive, like doing an adaptive learning for the student. Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. And that segues right into the one last app that I didn't address, which is in the bottom right-hand corner here, AI for accessibility projects for Microsoft, which, you know, we talk about good, bad, and ugly. This is a good one because this is where they can help blind students or students who have accessibility issues, hearing, anything like that. So I believe that AI is not something that ever stands independently. I feel there's kind of a symbiotic relationship between the human that's interpreting it. When I gave the example of the radiologist not being needed, no, but they're not going to fire radiologists. Yes, the AI is going to give you the data, and it's going to probably see things that a human with the naked eye wouldn't have seen. But the radiologist still needs to interpret that and figure out what to do with that information. So that's what I don't personally, I don't think there's a lot of, there could be bad with AI, but I'm more optimistic about the good as long as we use it, as long as we create parameters of how we're using it and who is using it.
One of the seminal works for me was a book that came out a few years ago. It's called Human plus Machine, Reimagining Work in the Age of AI. It's done by Paul Doherty and James Wilson. Wonderful book, very anecdotal, but also taking a deep dive into what was possible at that time and what people thought was going to happen over the next few years. The thing that strikes me as I look at a book like that and look around me to see how that book translates into the experiences that my colleagues and I are having is that whenever we say AI can do this or can't do this, I found myself inclined to say it can't do this yet. Because as Ruben Fuenteduta has said so much, and you heard this in the keynote this morning, that whole concept of black swans, you don't know what's coming until it comes. And the best thing you can do is develop the skills that make you easily adapt to those changes that they come. And he talked again off that same theory of creating a sense of anti-fragility, that idea that if you face something very difficult and world changing and you survive that, you have become stronger. It's a step up from the book that Ruben and I have both done a lot of work around by Taleb on anti-fragility. It's that whole idea that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And if we prepare ourselves for that, then we're in a good position. We're not trying to predict the future, we're trying to help shape it. So getting back to human and machine, I found that fascinating. There were a lot of different things talking about what AI could and could not do when the book was written. And being curious and kind of being geeky, I realized many of the stories they told were here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So when I got to one that I thought was lovely, it was about a big shop here in San Francisco, a big chain of stores that, according to Doherty and Wilson, had AI-driven robots meeting people at the door, programmed well enough to take them through the store to help them find things, and being programmed at a level where when the machine was no longer able to deal with things, introducing the person to a person in the workplace that could take over where the robot left off. I thought that was fascinating. So I called the store and said, I'd love to come in and see this. And you know what happens next, of course. I got transferred around 4 or 5 times before I finally found somebody that even knew what I was talking about from a book that was only about a year old at that point. And the terse answer from the person that knew about it said, oh, yes, we don't have those anymore. I said, well, can I talk to somebody that was involved in that? I'd love to know what worked and what didn't work and why you don't have it anymore. And she says, well, the person's no longer with us. So I think to myself, we look at these things and we see what's going on and we see what we think is possible. And experiments are rolling out all the time. And we heard this from Ruben. We've heard it from other people in the session I was just in before this in terms of library land. We will try things. We'll experiment. Some of it will work. Some of it will not work. We don't beat ourselves over the head when it doesn't work. It's the whole process of creativity and exploration. And I think that's one of the great things about human plus machine. When we get right down to what the book is suggesting to us, what the authors are suggesting, it is that humans do certain things really well and machines are not doing them yet, and they may never do them. Machines are doing things that we can't do, and they make us more efficient and they help to make our lives easier when they work right. So do we want to just set up hard lines of machines will always do this and people will always do this? Or do we want to sort of go with the flow in the spirit of Space Camp here and explore what the possibilities are, keep our ethical foundations solid so that we do not cross lines that bother us and create anything less than the society of our dreams? And how do we work together to get ourselves there? So that's a wonderfully dense book condensed to its essence here. And it raises the question, what are you comfortable with right now in training, teaching, learning that you think could benefit from the use of machines? And what are you seeing as that Maginot line that if we cross this, we have gone down a path of no return in terms of taking us into the kind of society that we don't want? Comments from anybody? I see a big smile out there. I just know I'm going to get a comment. Go ahead, unmute yourself, Tom. Nah, he's not going to take the bait.
I can unmute myself, but I'm glitching right now, so sorry. No, I agree that I think there's going to be a convergence where we have complementary directions coming together. I made a sort of flippant comment about, there's 2 ways to look at this. The machines are becoming more like us, but we're also becoming more like the machines in some ways. There's been a lot of talk about, people doing the Ray Kurzweil thing and uploading into systems. If you read Neil Stephenson's, not his last book, but the one before that, Fall, is all about that. And it's a really interesting idea. So yeah, I'm waiting to be uploaded.
Okay, we will upload lots of you because we need more voices like yours. I've seen from chat. Go ahead. The
fundamental problem we're going to face, though, and this has been alluded to several times in chat, and Lisa also was mentioning it, is that right now, at least, machines are not thinking independently. They're thinking based on what we build them to do. And when we build in our biases, and we build in structural problems, then we perpetuate those. And one of the things that happens with just about every technology is we graft it onto existing systems first, and then ultimately ultimately adapt the systems around the technology eventually. But for a while there, you have a situation where AI is being used to perpetuate systems of observation, systems of selection that are directly, I mean, the fact that we have admissions processes like Lisa was talking about in the first place is a legacy of industrial education. And so one of the most dangerous things at any technological inflection point is that point where we're making the old broken systems work better before we invent new systems. That's what we do a lot. And AI is not going to be any, as far as I can see for now, at least, AI is no exception to that rule. That's my concern, is that we can get past that. But that's going to involve taking some good hard looks at the systems that we've built for the last 150, 200 years and making some hard calls about, okay, is this really serving humans, or are we serving the system? And that's going to become, technology amplifies all that, and it makes it so much more stark, and it can be much more oppressive. And so you can have 1984 on the one hand, or a utopia on the other.
Thanks, Tom. And that leads us right into some of the comments that are in chat now. Robin says, with all technology, proceed with caution, questions, and intelligence. Let us remember, at least for now, we are in control of this, and we can help to set our future by setting those strong lines of what is important to us and what we think is working. Susan says, I'd love to use more AI to help tailor learning experiences, but at this time, it takes a lot of effort to build and set up. It's absolutely true. Christopher says, to riff on the comments that I was making, chatbots are one of the tools where AI is really beginning to have an impact in programming the chatbot with branded responses, including tone and content, to FAQs from users, students, faculty, and staff. It frees up staff to address more complex problems and issues in order to pick up where the chat reaches its limits. So now we're back in Doherty land, in human plus machine. What can that do to make our lives easier? Recognizing what was just said about some of this takes a lot of work up front to do, but when we put that work in, it may lead to things that give us possibilities we didn't have. Susan says, and then a lot of time and effort to manage and maintain is needed there. Lisa has put in an agreement with that. Susan, sometimes we get access to it easily through apps. Robin answered yes, and the skills and strategies to be a lifelong learner come with that. And then Tom, being Tom, has said us, you're not in control of this. Mark Zuckerberg is. Not in my map, man. I turn off Facebook and I come to this session where I dream and drive with Space Camp. And I hope that what all of this is leading.
Yeah, there are many other analogies to Mark Zuckerberg, but the point is that these AIs are not being controlled by the everyman. That was the main point. I wasn't trying to pick on Mark. He was just an easy target.
No, he's not in today's session, so we can say whatever we want to. Lisa, let me toss it back to you. Anything you want to add?
Well, I'm looking what Cynthia just said. AI for sentiment analysis and emotional recognition might help us in larger classes to connect better with students by recognizing their needs. It's easy to miss important cues online and in campus class. Exactly. And so that kind of brings up the idea. Think of this AI. It's a good thing, but it's going so fast that in society, we forgot to ask ourselves, should we be like looking at this and deciding how, when, and why this is used? I mean, it is a very helpful thing and will be a helpful thing. Imagine the research done in universities. Is this going to replace research? Because it's going to do the research. So where are those jobs going to go when you have the AI, when you're talking about workforce development and things like that? But if as a society, and then even as in an institution, say in an academic institution, each time there's a new AI application, I would suggest that they have, like, we're talking ethics here, right? Perhaps an AI and ethics a group that decides, is this something that we really want to use? As Cynthia says, that actually helps because we're reaching those students who were forgotten. Or is this something impeding on the whole philosophy of why you go to a university? So what do you think about that one? Anyone? Anyone want to unmute? And
Well, we're waiting for that. Cynthia's put an interesting comment in about AI for sentiment analysis and emotion recognition might help us in larger classes
That's
to
awesome.
connect better with students by recognizing their needs. It's easy to miss the important cues in an online and on-campus class. John added, as we consider the convergence of technology, systems, and our own thinking, will a hive mind of uploaded human knowledge coupled with in-time learning and near instant processing create a fruitful environment for creativity and exploration? Tom's come back to a key theme that runs through a lot of his work. If technology is centered on the needs of the individual, you can't go far wrong. George answered to that, I believe AI is synchronous in practice today, and asked the question, how can we evolve it? And that again is something we can explore a little bit at Space Camp, and we can follow up with what Lisa was saying. If this appeals to you and you want to make it real, have a group through ShapingEDU, like our broadband expansion group and our storytelling, documenting success stories of the pandemic group. These groups can work together to do something that's meaningful to the whole community.
One of the things at our university is using ALEKS, ALEKS, for math placement. And so on one hand, professors will give all sorts of resources, tell you to explore, go everywhere, but then they really are going to test you on the limited things that they're going to test you on. And so I think that particularly the ALEKS app is wonderful at learning something like calculus, because as it tests and decides your level, and then as you have a problem, if you don't understand the different levels of math behind that particular problem, it will let you pull up, and I need the explanation of this and this and this. So it directs you right down the path of resources. But on the other hand, it also, there are a lot of students who cheat and just skip the whole thing and get the answer and move on. So it's become kind of controversial of how do you get these new tools, which, I love my tutor, but he's in 17 different directions now, so I don't really have him. So if ALEKS was going to turn into my full-fledged tutor who was going to catch every time I was going in a wrong direction and pull me right back and lead me right through, that would be lovely. We're not quite there yet. So, I'm not ready to discard humans yet. But we also have to think about all these things where we're set up in educational systems that are set around very specific ways of learning and very specific things that we wanted to know. And then we say, but don't memorize those. Go explore something else. And whether you really just can get back to where you need to be by yourself can be difficult.
I like the framework that Tom's given us, asking, what is the real thing that we're trying to accomplish and how does it work at a human level? If we focus on the tools we're using and what we want them to accomplish, including AI, it gives us a framework that sets the whole tenor of the conversation we have about the ethics of using AI. A wonderful colleague a few years ago talking about AI in libraries and AI in learning went through the whole ethical dilemma of how do you program an AI so that it deals with that moment of, do I run over one person or do I run over 10 people? And I love the punchline to it, which is that ethics doesn't give us the answers. Ethics is that whole thing of posing the questions we want to be asking so that we can address the issues that are the underlying concerns for us so that we create what we want to. I love what Cynthia said in chat a few minutes ago about building on the qualities we value. One way that we can be using AI, building on those qualities we value, which feature connecting with learners and helping them to discover and shape self-determined learning. She goes on a little bit from that. We're not talking there about discarding humans. Again, we're talking about human plus machine and seeing what works. Susan's along those same lines when she says, that's what I want to find out more about. My ASD, my ADHD, and other neurodiverse students are extremely capable and learn differently. The question here is, how can AI help me to enable learning for all students, and let's grow our own society's knowledge and capability bank of citizenry that might otherwise be marginalized? So this is not about us saying machines are taking us over. or we're going to lose control. Saying, what do we want them to do? What are their strengths? And again, having a firm ethical thing, that a foundation that leads us into these topics. Again, Lisa, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, exactly. When you said library, you reminded me of, because this could go either way, right? If AI is going to be used to give me recommendations of what books to read, like Netflix does. You know, we all have Netflix. You go on Netflix, the AI tells you, okay, well, you liked this show, so now you're going to like this show. But personally, I like to read all sorts of different genres. So if the AI and the person, or if there is a person, or the AI is going to keep recommending the same thing, then I'm actually losing out by deferring to just that AI. And so that's where we're talking about, we're having the discussion about ethics. We have to talk about, well, how do we want to present what the AI is doing for us, and how do we want to stay in control of it? I think that's what it is. I still don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, but I don't know that anyone has really had a discussion about how are we kind of just let the AI, the Netflix or the recommendations when you're on, you know, a website, or we kind of just let it happen. Oh, okay. But we're passive in the way that AI is presented to us. So perhaps in the university sector, we should be talking about how we can not go into it as passive instructors receiving, you know, ways we're supposed to be teaching, but how, again, the symbiotic relationship, again, what can we do to be a part of that decision making with the AI?
Christopher has what he labels a good counterpoint here in the chat. AI for remote exam proctoring is deeply problematic for a host of reasons. Back to Robin's comment, we need to approach this with caution, questions, and intelligence. And I would add to that list empathy. Reminds me of something I went through a few years ago, which is what drew me into AI and learning. I've been involved in teaching, training, learning for quite a while now. And it was only over a dinner where I did not expect AI to be a topic of conversation. I thought we were all going to be sitting down in San Diego looking out over the water and just talking about light things. And somebody mentioned that she was working for a company that anticipated by the end of that particular year, moving all its instructional design into AI. And I said, how is it possible? She says, well, we've got some programs that we're working on. And if they continue to work out by the end of the year, it will all be done by AI. And my face literally went ashen. She said, are you all right? And I said, no, I'm not all right. You're talking about the loss of a huge number of jobs for colleagues of mine. I'm not full-time an instructional designer, so that wasn't going to be my loss of a paycheck. But I know a lot of instructional designers. I said, you're telling me a company by the end of this year will be doing that? Came back to San Francisco, talked to everybody I knew who knew anything about technology, saying, this is what I'm hearing from somebody who knows what she's talking about. And they walked me through, calling me down and saying, now, we know AI and it's not at that level yet. Now, a few years down the road, you know that not all the instructional designers in the world have been replaced by AI. But that's the sort of thing where I think on the one hand, we have to be watching for those signs from the people around us that are knowledgeable. The other part of it is we have to be asking ourselves, how realistic is this? And saying, if that played out, what will we do to be ready for it? If it doesn't play out, what can we learn from this particular scare so that when the next scare or the next big black swan comes along, that we're not totally flummoxed by it. This gives us at ShapingEDU and in our communities of learning great latitude to explore what's out there and to help shape it rather than, as Lisa was saying, just being passively drawn along by it. So where are we? What are people thinking in terms of what your strengths are as a teacher, as an educator, as a trainer, and where might AI fit in a positive way to make your life better and produce positive results for your learners? Anybody? George says engagement. Perfect.
Maybe some of you are already doing that, like the math website AI, or any of you doing the grading apps, or is anyone using already AI in their classroom, or have you seen AI at your institution, maybe even just campus itself?
So I use AI in my classes. I have two different programs I use. I use one called Perusal, which we can put either a textbook in there that the students purchase, or you can put original content that you have or videos. and students will automatically comment on those. And then there's an algorithm that Perusal has that will automatically grade them. It's not on word count. It is basically, it does take into effect what is happening in the text. There's another one called Yellow Dig Engage, which looks more like a social media platform, like a Facebook platform and stuff like that. I give students a lot more freedom there to talk about whatever they want, but that is based on basically word count and everything. And I've had to adjust my thinking on that because I resisted going there for years and years and years. What I have found is if I give students ideas to talk about, that's what they talk about. And I just let them go. And they really seem to enjoy it because they get to kind of choose their topics of what to discuss. In both of those platforms, they get to choose what they want to discuss versus a traditional discussion board, which I find is typically what's called I call it a drive-by, right? The students will come in right before it's due. They'll do their original post and then their 2 other posts, or I'll force them to come back over multiple days and then they hate me. So that's where I've used the AI in my classes.
Thanks,
Brent, if you
Lisa.
could put that in the chat, I'll add it to our resource list and I shared
Sure.
the link to the resource list in the chat and I'll share it again, but that would be great. Thank
Great.
you.
So while Lisa's sharing that resource list, let's come around to the critically important question of any session like this. You've been in this for about 43 minutes now. We're down to our last 2 minutes. As a result of what you've seen and heard today and participated in this conversation, what's one thing you will do differently in the next week? Please put that in chat or unmute yourself and let's see what kind of an impact this level of conversation has on us shaping our future. If you don't know one thing you'll do differently, then we'll just up the ante and say 2 things. Okay, here we go. Tom's saying I will convert myself into an AI so I can go on vacation. Okay, then, Tom, we know where to find you. European Tom as an AI. Anybody else? I love Brent's reaction. I will sleep. Not yet. You have another session or 2 to do, Brent. Seriously, does a conversation inspire any action on your side in terms of looking at AI and how it's going to affect our industry and how it is affecting our industry? I love Robin's answer. I will purposely ask myself more questions to be cautious each time I believe AI is present.
Another thing to consider is I deal also with students who are before pre-university, and I teach AI because I think it's really important for them to learn about it, to use it, and to understand what it is, because for them, it's going to be something that's all around them in the future. So they really, especially if they want, there's so many career openings for them. We talked about, well, we're losing jobs, but I feel like if they can understand AI, that the sky's the limit for what it can do. I mean, I've done a thing where I've put it out there. If you could make anything use AI, what would it be? And a couple of them came up with things like crime fighting. Like you could have some kind of a device that, you know, drives around streets and knows the data of where there's crime. And
It could predict when people are going to commit a crime before they actually commit a crime and then arrest them.
there you go.
That's a good idea.
Tom, we may have to edit that out of this conversation.
the sky's the limit. I mean, that's what I want to say.
Oh no, they're coming for me.
You know, there's
Tom,
so
I'll speak up for you. Well, we're at the end of our time together, Lisa. After you say goodbye, if you want to stop the recording, a couple of us can hang for a few minutes more if you want to continue this off camera, but thank you so much. Seeing Ruben adding one last comment in there, I'm reviving some pre-COVID projects on lightweight AI tools, e.g. based upon Google Colab or Mathematics for Students to develop their own AI tool sets. We'll be watching for your research, Ruben.
oh, wow,
Thank you, everybody. Look forward to hearing from you and seeing where we're going to take this conversation beyond the confines of Space Camp if it's of interest to you. Stay in touch with us, please.